views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
All right, welcome to today's Verdict, the live and interactive show. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. As usual, we have a very big show for you today. We have somebody from Legal Aid who's going to be discussing all things immigration and ways you can protect yourself and get all the benefits you need. Next up, we have a state senator who's going to be talking about legalization of marijuana and everything you need to know to make sure that if you have any issues, you know where to go to when it comes to reaching out to the community. And finally, last up, we have an attorney who's also in politics, discussing from the defense point of view what it's like to be practicing law. As you can see, we have much to get to, so stay tuned. Today's verdict starts right now. Welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host, David Lesch. I am so happy to have a personal friend of mine and an adversary as well, Frank Lombardi, on with us. Frank, how are you doing today?
David, good morning. How are you?
You know, it gives me particular pleasure to have attorneys that I personally deal with because I know how good they can be, and you're one of them, and you're not even on my side. You're on the defense side. So we're really happy to have you here. And I'm sure things have not been so easy with respect to practicing while COVID from the defense perspective. Am I correct?
Yeah, you're actually 100% correct. You know, attorneys like you and I, litigators who go to court all the time, especially, you know, we're in the Bronx 3-4 times a week at least. It's definitely different. And I don't get an opportunity to see my good friends like yourself and your brother and so many others that we are, you know, unfortunately at our age now, you know, we used to be the young guys. Now we're the older guys. We are the, you know, we're the Bronx regulars that the young ones look up to. And, you know, so, yeah, it's been tough. It's been tough, but you know what, we've done well. You know, I'm at Pillinger Miller Torello now. We just passed 5 years and the firm has done, you know, really well in terms of maintaining itself. And thank God there hasn't been any layoffs from file clerks to attorneys to paralegals, you know, so the principals of the firm have done a really great job.
Has it been an easy transition to the virtual world, you know, in terms of the conferences, depositions? Has it been a little bit of a learning curve?
Not necessarily a learning curve, but it's been odd in terms of, you know, not being in the courthouse, not being there. You know, I mentioned to you earlier, this is probably the first time I'm putting on a tie in several weeks. Where we put them on every day, but we've done a lot of different things in terms of, you know, maintaining ourselves and we've done a lot of, right. The virtual stuff has actually been okay in terms of a benefit for our clients that, you know, there's no travel time involved in what we do any longer. But we've done a lot of mediations and we've gotten rid of a lot of cases that way. And so, which has been good.
How have the insurance adjusters been handling the situation now? Do they maybe join in on some of the conferences, the virtual conferences for mediations? You know, you can't always get them into the courthouse. Remember when the judges would say, bring down your adjuster, and the adjuster never would fly in, but now you could have them available. Does that make it easier?
It definitely does make it easier for them if need be, but you know, for the most part, most of the adjusters that I've dealt with, they're like, hey, you're a seasoned attorney, I don't need to be there. You know, they just give us authority on you know, how to resolve a case or what, you know, their plan is. And we take it to court. So they don't necessarily need to be there. But if they did need to be there, if they were across the country, you're right. It's just as easy for them to appear, you know, from their home in, you know, wherever, Georgia, than fly up.
What do you think? I've been getting this question often. When are we opening up to the point where we're actually going to be in the courtroom again, picking juries, taking testimony? What are your thoughts on that?
I know that there's been, you know, Brooklyn has opened with jury selection recently and some trials, some criminal stuff and some civil stuff as well. You know, you and I practice mostly in the Bronx and I do a lot of the stuff in the suburbs as well. And I don't know, I'm hoping that at least, you know, by September, we can get back to a sense of normalcy in terms of going to court conferences, maybe not the rooms as full as they always are when we get there, but maybe the calendars will be less. They'll be half the size, so therefore half the attorneys. And I'm hoping by September that most people will have their vaccinations and things like that done.
The viewers don't know that you also have a political background, and that's one of the reasons I also brought you on, because we're morphing into a political show as well. Why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about your background and in terms of your representation of the
Sure. So I grew up obviously in the Bronx, David. I'm a Bronx guy. Grew up in Pelham Bay, and I would go with my dad to homeowner association meetings, and I got interested in it, and eventually I think you had interviewed him, former councilman James Vaca, who's a personal friend as well. He met me when I was about 14 or 15, coming to these meetings and say, hey, why don't you join the community board? So I was on the community board at age 16. And then probably about 1998 or 99, I ended up become the chairman of Community Board 10. And what I was told was I was one of the youngest in the city's history, 27, 28 years old. And then I moved my family up to Carmel, to the town of Carmel. And I got involved in here, planning board and environmental conservation board. And in 2009, I ran for a town board for councilman, and I won, and I served for 8 years. 6 of those years as deputy supervisor. During that time, I was also spent some time as part-time legislative counsel to the New York State Senate. So I got to go on the Senate floor, which I don't know if you've been there, David. It's one of the most beautiful rooms that I've ever seen.
Incredible. It really is. It's incredible to be up there. It makes you really feel, like a lawyer, like a legislator. It's just
it's wonderful. One of the things that I was able to actually participate in that I'll never forget was, and I don't know if you've had a chance to interview him, Court of Appeals Justice Garcia, Michael Garcia. I was there for the day of his hearing with the Judiciary Committee, and then I was on the Senate floor for the vote. And he's from Tarrytown, and he was there with his children. His wife, I think, she was stuck on vacation. There was a storm wherever they were, so she wasn't able to fly in. But I got a chance to meet with him. I have some great pictures with him. And what a very intelligent, smart man. So I've been councilman in the town of Carmel. I took 2 years off, and I ran again in 2019. In the midst of a 4-year term now. And during that time, the supervisor, based upon my experience, once COVID hit, he asked me to be the COVID liaison for the town, dealing with the county officials, school officials, State Department of Health, coming up with plan how to organize town hall and the employees. We have about 150 employees and about a $32 million budget with the police department and parks and stuff. So we had to come up with some creative ways how to serve the community while still maintaining safety for our staff and our residents.
The nice thing when you're a practicing lawyer and you're also representing the public is that you really get in there and you can see it, from the ground level. And I think that's one of the best attributes that you have in terms of your sympathy. And I see the way you are with juries also. I'm going to ask you a question that I've been asking a lot of the mayoral candidates that we've been interviewing, is that where do you see us going? As a city, suburb wise, we're a little broken right now. Maybe just some thoughts on where we're heading.
Well, I love the city of New York. I grew up there. My children were all born there, and being in the Bronx, in the Northeast Bronx, you really got a great feeling for the city and traveling down into Manhattan for court and whatnot all over the city. And I do hope that the next mayor, puts the city back on some steady tracking in terms of fiscal, in terms of safety and crime and things like that, because people do need that. As far as the suburbs go, I think, there's been a movement recently, which we were involved in police reform, which we submitted, and we have a new police chief, which we interviewed at the beginning of the year, who's come out and, gangbusters. He's done a great job for us, and he's loved by the public so far that he's been on board. So, there's just a lot of different things in terms of financial aspects and taxes and really safety. I mean, I'm sure that, the real estate market in the suburbs, I'm on the border of Westchester and Putnam, so right over the border in the town of Carmel. And a house doesn't last on the market here, Dave, for 24 hours. I mean, it's just people are leaving the city in droves.
You know what? We're just hoping that things can hopefully get back to normal, and we really appreciate that the work you do, Frank, both legally and in terms of just representing your community. You do it so well, and please, you'll come back. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. David, say hello to the family and everyone, and your dad and mom, and happy holidays to everyone.
Say hello to everybody.
See you soon. Hopefully I'll see you in person real soon.
I really hope so. All right, stay with us. Today's verdict's got so much more right after this. We're back. Today's verdict with one of our favorite guests, and I'm not just saying that. State Senator Luis Sepúlveda is with us. Senator, how are you doing today?
All right. We had a busy day yesterday with the process of legalization in the legislature of recreational marijuana.
It's been quite a couple of days for you. You must be exhausted. Sum it up for the viewers and let them know how great you did.
If you see the MRTA, which is the bill within the budget that's legalizing recreational marijuana, a lot of good things are going to come from this. First, we expect about anywhere between $300 and $400 million in revenue. Of that amount, 40% is being earmarked for the state lottery educational system, 20% for drug education, drug treatment, and we're going to have 50% is going to be dedicated to social equity, so that communities that were impacted by marijuana arrests, young men and women who can't get scholarships, all of them will now have an opportunity to get an opportunity to invest in this new industry and get expungement of records.
Why were we so late to the game? You look at California, you look at a lot of the other states. What is it about us that took us to get to this point? I mean, this is a big win for you. It's a big win for all of us. But why did it take so long?
Well, I think the thing that kept us in this position this long was that social equity component of the legislation. We didn't want to create a new industry where big companies and medical marijuana companies would come in and gobble up the industry. We made it a requirement that expungement was necessary, because it would be unjust for people to be able to invest in this business, yet young Black men and Latino men and women who got convictions would not be allowed to participate in this industry. So that was one of the biggest sticking points. Also, we want to dedicate a funding stream for education. The other states, not all of them had that. And luckily, we had legislators like Assemblywoman, who's a majority leader in the Assembly, People Stokes, who insisted from the get-go that the social equity component had to be part of the legislation in order for us to approve it.
Where do we go from here? This isn't the end of it. There is always more we can do to help those, people of color who have been, either wrongfully, convicted because of different issues involving, being picked up on the street for certain things. This is only one component, right?
Yes.
Where are we heading in New York, in your opinion? This is just one step, really.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about social and justice equity in general, I think part of what we have to do is continue to reform the police system in New York City. You also have a commissioner now who wants to blame everything on criminal justice reform. Talks about bail reform being the biggest problem when we have a rise in crime. He doesn't acknowledge that it's really mostly the pandemic and what's happened. He has not been able to make any direct connection between bail reform and the current spike in crime, yet he throws that out there because I guess he needs an excuse to justify why crime has risen and why they can't point a finger at his policies. Look, once the pandemic is over, whenever you see this kind of civil unrest, and you've seen it in other states, once the civil unrest calms down, then you see crimes going back to normal levels. And in New York City, we've had historic drops in crimes. But when you have a pandemic, when people are suffering from mental illness, when you have economic disaster that we suffered because of policies from the prior administration, then that leads to a lot of the things. And when communities are impacted in a way, economically in a way that's not helpful, it is 3 times as poor or 3 times more impactful in communities of color and poor communities. And so I think we have to continue to reform our criminal justice system so that it's not premised on your bank account, the zip code, or the color of your skin.
We've been, the last couple of weeks, we've been interviewing several candidates for mayor, and, what they've been saying on air is they really want to kind of give they want to give the public the streets back. And what they mean by that is they want the public to feel, that they're not always looking over their shoulder, and that this whole qualified immunity, we're all trying to give it back to the people on the streets who are most affected. Do you think this is going to continue? Do you think there's going to be a little bit of a real pushback against, a progressive movement, or is this the future of our city, Senator?
Well, I mean, there's always pushback against progressive movements. The New York City Police Union and the Sergeants Union are one of the biggest purveyors of pushback. They don't want anything to change. Any type of reform, they consider it the end of policing as we know it, and they start the fear mongering. But fortunately, you have now progressives, especially in the state legislature, who really are willing to tackle and take on the police union and aren't as fearful as they used to be of the union. I mean, let's be real about where police officers, generally speaking, live. They don't live in New York City. We pay taxpayer dollars that funds their salaries, pays their salaries, and then they go outside of the city where they live. So the fear of the union is dissipated considerably over the years. And that's not to say that we shouldn't do everything we can to protect them, to make sure that they do their jobs in a safe manner. But there has to be a balance. And the balance has to begin by respecting the communities of color where they work.
I would be remiss if I didn't talk to you a little bit about COVID. We seem to be coming out of it, but there are still so many people who have been affected. There is a rise in our state in terms of infections. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the rise in hospitalizations, but there has been a rise in infections. What are your final thoughts with respect to the vaccination, with respect to COVID, and where we're heading?
Everyone should get vaccinated. My office created a program where we have directly assisted almost 800 people in getting vaccinated. The Bronx still has the lowest vaccination rate of any county. We're at about 27%. As usual, the Bronx are usually last on everything else because, look, I put some of that blame on us as leaders that have not pushed the administration to make sure that we don't continue to be last on everything that's important: job growth, economic growth, housing. We have to continue to push for that. But you have to get vaccinated. And even if you get vaccinated, you have to continue to wear the masks, wash your hands, because they're variants. New York City now has its own variant. You have the Brazilian variant, the South African variant, that you, as a person who's vaccinated, may not get the symptoms or may not get as ill, but you can certainly infect someone else. And I think opening too soon has created a problem. You're seeing directors of CDC now saying, we're concerned by these openings. You have situations like in Texas and other southern states that for political reasons think that now it's time to reopen, and that's insane. These people are going to travel to New York at some point because everyone comes here.
Sure.
And they stand the possibility of bringing that here, even though, regardless of how you feel about the mayor, I think the mayor has done a very good job in terms of COVID, and the governor, until his recent problems and the issue with the nursing homes, I did a good job. But now it's up to us as local legislators to continue to make sure that our communities get vaccinated and protected, especially here in the Bronx, because if you get a cold in the Bronx, you get in Manhattan or Brooklyn, you get pneumonia in the Bronx. And so that's part of our job.
Stay with us. We got so much more. Today's Verdict coming back right after this. We're back with today's verdict. We're happy to have here Susan Welber, a government benefits specialist with Legal Aid Society. And you're here to talk to us a little bit about the public charge rule. Maybe you can walk us through a little bit of the history, if that's possible.
Sure. So public charge has been a part of American immigration law for over a century. Until the Trump administration took office, it was a ground for denying immigrants entry or adjustment to get their green card or LPR status that was used pretty infrequently. So the old rule did not disqualify a lot of people from getting their green card and becoming permanent residents.
Now, is that because we just wanted more people to come in during that time to help build our country back up? And is that why it really wasn't enforced or really used?
It was enforced, but it was narrowly drawn to only apply to people who had no potential for supporting themselves long term. It did not apply to people who happen to be low income when they come to the United States, which is the history of many immigrants for many centuries, of coming to the United States to build a better economic future, and not necessarily having a lot of money when you arrive. It was never intended to exclude low-income immigrants. It was only intended to exclude people who weren't able to support themselves, or weren't predicted to be able to to support themselves long term.
When did it change, Susan? When did the government decide to start using it in a different way?
So when the Trump administration took office in January of 2017, the same time that they issued the Muslim ban that rightfully received a lot of attention and pushback, a draft executive order was leaked to the press that laid out a roadmap for how the Trump administration planned to expand public charge so that it would apply to anyone who's low income who wants to come into the country and adjust their status, essentially. So, many of us have called it a wealth test. And so it expanded the public charge rule. They sort of laid the groundwork in this draft executive order of how they were going to expand the rule, not only to apply to people who were low income, but it was clear that it was designed to have a disparate impact on excluding low-income immigrants of color, particularly folks from Central America and from the Caribbean. And so that was the design. And then it was issued as a regulation a couple years later. And a bunch of plaintiffs, including here in New York, Make the Road New York, the Asian American Federation, the African Services Committee, Clinic, and Catholic Charities, Legal Aid represented, along with the Center for Constitutional Rights and Paul Weiss, those organizational plaintiffs who serve immigrant rights. We sued the Trump administration to say this rule is racist and illegal and can't stand.
Well, let me ask you a question. I'm a firm believer that many of the people who come into our country, who immigrate and come in, take the jobs that a lot of Americans don't want to have anyway. And, it's almost as if if they don't have the money and they don't have the wealth, they're going to go out there and take those jobs that many Americans don't feel like doing, whether they're on the farms or wherever they are. So I don't necessarily have a problem having people come in here who may not have as much money as everybody else. But where do we stand at this point? I mean, I understand there are some people on the other side that say that we don't want this to be a welfare state, and that we're going to be supporting all these people who come in. Where are we? Are we in the middle? What's the litmus? Where do you feel?
What I feel is that the whole premise of what you just said is actually founded on myths. There is no welfare state that's available to undocumented people, to many lawfully present immigrants. Congress eliminated eligibility for most major public benefits in 1996, or instilled a waiting period that only a few people can ever get in line to benefit from. So there's been this myth that's been propagated that immigrants are disproportionately using welfare benefits, food stamps, and all the types of benefits that were encompassed by the Trump public charge rule. But it's just not true. It's just not empirically true. It's a talking point for right-wing immigration.
Has there ever been any studies done in terms of financially and where the monies go?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm not talking spin here. That's empirically true, that this was never a problem. And in fact, the rule, part of the reason that the rule made so little sense is that it defined who's a public charge by who is receiving or likely to receive benefits. And we know, government benefit specialists like me, that the immigrants that the rule purported to target are not eligible for those benefits. So it was really designed to get the message to immigrants, both those who are subject to public charge and those who aren't. Don't use government benefits because it will jeopardize your immigration options in the future. And that was the deterrence effect, is what really drove the rule. Now, the good news is, and I really want your viewers to understand this, that the rule has now, because of our success in the courts, and most recently last week, the Biden administration dropped appeals that the Trump administration had initiated in response to our wins blocking the rule. Because those appeals were dropped, the rule is no longer in effect. It's been vacated nationwide. And in fact, it's been excised from the CFR. So the rule is no more. And
Is there any workaround that people are using to try and get around that? Or does it look like now that there is no more rule, we're safe? Or do you find that there's going to be a loophole that people can use to kind of work around it?
Well, the Biden administration right now, what's in effect is the rule that had been in effect from 1999 until the Trump administration changed the rule in 2019. And that rule says that if you are primarily dependent on cash assistance, which is just one type of benefit that most immigrants aren't eligible for anyway. But if you're primarily dependent on cash assistance, or you're receiving long-term institutional care that's government funded, so in other words, you're in a nursing home, then you may be considered a public charge. And that's
Okay.
the current rule, and it applies to very few people. And no, there really is no loophole that we expect USCIS to apply to folks to try to make them public charges.
No, it's just because only as an attorney, sometimes you think ahead, I do at least, you think ahead, like, where are the problems going to come? That's how we're trained to think.
The biggest problem is that people, even though this happened, this is like in the realm of the courts and the legal system and the regulations. And so we all are really trying to get the word out to non-citizens across the country that you do not have to fear receiving public benefits. And that includes stimulus payments, that includes pandemic EBT, that includes SNAP, that includes all forms of healthcare, that includes vaccinations. In California, they did a study that showed that 1 in 4 non-citizens were avoiding vaccination because of fear of the public charge rule that doesn't even apply to vaccinations. So there's been a misinformation campaign that we're trying to correct, and it's really wonderful that you are paying attention to this issue, because hopefully this can help us.
It's our pleasure, and we really appreciate you coming on. We hope to have you back, and please send my regards to everybody at Legal Aid. I'm a big fan.
Thank you so much.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us, and of course you, the viewers, for watching. If you have an issue or anything you'd like me to discuss on the show, feel free to email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. Until the next time, know your issues, reach a verdict. We'll see you in 2 weeks.